It's Mo. It is May 5th. So it's time to talk about all the books that I read in April. This is my April wrap-up. April seems like it was such a long time ago, and it feels like I read some of these books months and months ago. And if you don't know, I used to do my reading wrap-ups as vlog-style reading wrap-ups where I would talk about the books in vlog clips and then string them all together, but they were super, super long, so I decided to switch over to weekly updates. So if you want to see more in-depth thoughts of any of these books, you can go to all the weekly updates that I had in April, and you can see my thoughts on the books closer to the time when I read them, like right after I read them, and there's more information in those videos, as well as life updates. The first book that I finished in April is Faithful Place by Tana. This is the third book in the Dublin Murder Squad series. I really like this series. I'm trying to decide about some series if I want to continue them or not. I wasn't sure about this one because I really loved the first book. I enjoyed the second book, but I wasn't sure if I was going to like the third book. I did like the third book, and I will be continuing on with this series. The Dublin Murder Squad follows all sorts of people connected with a Dublin murder squad, but in each book we follow a different character. So the first book we follow Detective Ryan, in the second book we follow Detective Maddox, and in this one we follow Detective Mackey. And Detective Mackey is not actually part of the murder squad. He is actually part of an undercover squad that is connected to the murder squad, but this is more about his history and his past. So we meet him in the second book. We might even meet him in the first book briefly. This is more about a crime that he becomes aware of that is connected to his past, and he goes in search of the truth about this particular crime, which leads him back to his estranged family, somewhere that he did not expect to be. All the Dublin Murder Squad books are kind of similar to this in that we are dealing with a current crime, but it's somehow connected to the past of the main character that we're talking about. And I just really love that setup and that premise, and it always makes it really interesting. And then you get the bonus of them being kind of interconnected, so you get to hear about past main characters that you've read from before, and you get to kind of learn about new characters and speculate on who the next book is going to be about. So I was really happy to read this, and I will definitely be continuing on with the series. This is a long book for me. It's about 430 pages, and I read a lot of long books in April, but this was a great start to the month. Unfortunately, my month did go downhill. Not after this book, but later in the month, which we will talk about. If you've never read the Dublin Murder Squad, but you like mysteries, I definitely highly recommend, and I would definitely start with the first book. The next book that I finished in April, I really, really loved. It was My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. This is also in a series. This is the start of the Indian Lake series, and this is the second full-length Stephen Graham Jones that I have read. I have read a couple of short stories, I think, as well, and then I read The Only Good Indians. I've read The Only Good Indians twice. I love that book. This is another chunky book, and this book follows Jade, who is half Indian, and she lives in a very small town. She's kind of the black sheep of the town. She's kind of the outcast of the town, and she kind of leans into this identity or this persona, and part of the way that she does that is she loves slasher movies, and she loves horror, but specifically slashers, and she kind of is always waiting for a slasher to happen in her idyllic small town. She is always trying to identify who would be the final girl, who would be the sacrifice, who would be the perpetrators, who would be the slasher. In the very beginning of this book, we start right off with murders. This is definitely a horror book, and then we meet Jade, and then we see Jade go away for a period of time, and when she comes back to Indian Lake, it seems like her wish is going to come true, and there will be a slasher in her town. I think Stephen Graham Jones has a very specific cadence in all his writing, a very specific style of writing, which changes book to book, but usually has a lot to do with the internal monologue and the internal voice of the main character. In The Only Good Indians, that main character changes and shifts, so there's a lot of cadence style changes within the book. In this one, we're all in Jade's head. It's very much told in a conversational thought process kind of way, and I think that's really hard for people to get into, and it did take me a little while to get into this. Same with The Only Good Indians. When I first read that one, it was hard to get into, but I do think that that style really makes you immersed in the character, and so you're really in Jade's head. You're really feeling what she feels. You're really seeing it from her perspective in a unique way because of the way that it's written, and I really enjoy that. You have to see past some of Jade's annoying parts because she's not a wholly likable character, and you definitely need to suspend your disbelief for this one. I mean, it's a horror book. It's a slasher book, but overall, I just thought it was really fun and really interesting, and I can't wait to see what the next book in the series is like. I think this is going to be a trilogy, and now that we've had this slasher, now that it's gotten a little bit bananas by the end, what's going to happen in the second book? You know, what's the sequel? I really am curious to know. Definitely check trigger warnings. There is a lot of gore. There is a lot of violence. There is themes of sexual assault. There is abuse of children. There are murders, obviously. There's a strained relationship with family and a lot of other trigger warnings. So be warned when you go into this. This is a fun, silly, goofy horror, but this also has real life horrors in it as well. And I would say that this book is probably too long. This book comes in at just under 400 pages, 398, and I think probably 50 pages at least could have been cut from this. 50 pages of like repetitious inner monologue from Jade could have been cut from this, but overall I loved it. I can't wait to find the second book in the series. I can't wait to read it. I bet this one is fun on audio too, but I preferred reading it physically. The next book that I finished in April was Mr. Loverman by Bernadine Evaristo. This was my TBR spin for March, I believe. I'm definitely behind on the TBR spin. I was happy to read this one. I've had it for a while. It follows Barry, who is living in England. He has emigrated from Antigua, or immigrated from Antigua many years ago. Now he's a septuagenarian. He and his wife live in the house that they bought. Barry is pretty well off, but his wife and he don't have a great relationship, and we see that Barry is actually queer and he has had a lover, the true love of his life, Morris, for his entire life, longer than he's even been married to his wife. So this whole time, he's been living this dual life, one with his wife, and no wonder why their relationship isn't great, and one with the true love of his life, Maurice, or Morris. So this follows him as an older man, kind of trying to decide what he's going to do with his life and if he wants to live his truth, and we see him coming out to certain people, and we see how this tenuous relationship, all these tenuous relationships that he has in his life work. We also see from Barry's wife's perspective in certain chapters, more from Barry and then a little bit from his wife, and about her experience from her perspective of their relationship. Her chapters are much more condensed, and they're also like over longer periods of time, and they do give a nice juxtaposition to Barry. Barry is a very specific character. He is very misogynistic. He's very self-centered. He's very self-loving, that he like thinks he's the best and that he can do no wrong, but he is starting to see in his older age what he might have done to the people in his life that was not the correct way to behave. I think people really love this book, and I do love the themes of becoming your true self. I love coming out stories where people are accepted. I love the acceptance of queer family members. I love the idea that you live in a time, that we live in a time, I think this book takes place in 2010, where queerness is so much more accepted, and I enjoyed seeing Barry's time throughout his life of what was acceptable and what was not acceptable in the world as far as queerness is concerned. But overall, I just thought that Barry was a pretty unlikable character. I really couldn't get past his misogyny. I couldn't get past him cheating on the two most important people in his life, his wife and his greatest love, and I just didn't find him a connectable character. So I thought it was interesting. I liked the writing. It was quite simply written, but very enjoyable, and it was easy to connect with the writing. It just wasn't easy for me to connect with Barry's character. So overall, I didn't love it. I did read this one on audio, and I thought the audio narration was excellent. So if you're interested in reading this, I would still definitely highly recommend it. I think it is an interesting look at queer male life, and I would definitely give it a shot, but not my favorite. I will read more from Bernadine Evaristo. I also have Girl, Woman, Other. The next book that I finished in April was the one and only NYRB book that I read. It was NYRB April, and this is In the Freud Archives by Janet Malcolm. I loved this book. I thought it was so interesting. This is exactly the reason why I love to read NYRB books. Never heard of this book, would have never picked this book up, had no idea that this existed. Just because it was NYRB and just because I've heard other people talk about this NYRB book, I did pick it up, and I'm so glad. This is Janet Malcolm's exploration of three men who are connected to the Freud archives. Freud was a psychoanalyst, and this book has a lot to do with psychoanalysis and psychoanalysts, and this is a nonfiction, if that wasn't clear already, about these three men and their reverence for or skepticism of Freud. Freud was a very famous psychoanalyst and the father of psychoanalysis, and his disciples have created these archives, which is like all this material, all this work, all this writing, all these case studies that Freud did, but they don't really release it. Like, they keep it to themselves, and Freud's grandchild or daughter keeps them and only doles them out in small pieces and only to certain people, and it's like this weird secret society, and it definitely has like cult vibes, and it definitely has like mystery vibes. So one of the main people who run this archive, kind of against every other member's better judgment, brings in this like new brash Sanskrit scholar who seemingly reveres Freud, and then they have a falling out. While that's still happening, there's another third man who is also not a psychoanalyst, but who seemingly reveres Freud in some ways, and he kind of gets involved as well. And it's about this obsession that people form with the Freud archives, and it's about the obsessive nature of these men and about the drama that they create, and it's really, really fascinating. Definitely like tabloids hell all, super interesting drama, which is not the kind of thing that I usually love, but I do love weird niche places and things that people become obsessed with. This book reminded me a lot of, what was that one called? Mr. Somebody's Cabinet of Wonders, which was about a weird little museum. It reminded me of the Gardner heist, about the Gardner Museum in Boston, and the way that people became obsessed with a robbery that took place there. So I really love this one, really enjoyed reading it. I wish I'd read more for NYRB April, but I'm glad that I read this one because it was really good. The next book that I finished in April was Every Time I Go on Vacation, Someone Dies by Catherine Mack. I had tried it on audio, I didn't like it. I had read the first couple of pages, I didn't like it. But then I tried a chapter and I was like, okay, I'm going to read it. This story reminds me a lot of Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone, which I really liked, but I had a similar initial feeling about. And it is very similar to that book. It's very direct to reader. It is about an author. That book is too. Every Time I Go on Vacation, Someone Dies is about our main character, Eleanor. She's been taking care of her little sister since their parents died. When her little sister goes off to college 10 years ago, she went on vacation. On that vacation, she met Connor, and they had like a whirlwind romance and a whirlwind adventure where they solved a mystery and a murder. And then 10 years later, we see that Eleanor has written a book about that time, that vacation, that time in her life, and Connor. She wrote a book about it, it became a hit, and then she started writing a mystery series. Unfortunately for her, she changed every name in the mystery series except Connor's, and since then, Connor has been blackmailing her for residuals from her books. We're 10 years on, we're 10 books on, she's about to write her 10th book, and she goes on another vacation in Italy to do research for that book, and of course, Connor tags along. Her sister is also there because her sister is her assistant and her right-hand woman, and it turns out that this is also a book tour, so there are other authors there, including Eleanor's ex, who she still has feelings for. Obviously, mysteries ensue. Obviously, murder happens. Eleanor and Connor, as well as many of the other people involved, have to come together and solve this mystery. So it's very direct to reader. There's a lot of footnotes. There's a lot of asides. There's a lot of haha. I just think this one fell really flat. I just don't think it was well written. The premise is great. The characters were like fairly interesting. I think Eleanor is a very unlikable character that that's kind of a theme of this month. And overall, it just felt like a kind of a waste of my time. I mean, that sounds really bad, but I would have preferred reading another in the Ernest Cunningham, Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone series, as opposed to this. I am interested to see how they kind of shoehorn the next books into this series, because they do mention the next books in this book, but I don't think I will continue on, especially because I don't like the audiobook, so I don't think I'll be getting any more in this series. But if you're interested in direct-to-reader books, if you've already read Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone, give it a try, see if you like it. Maybe you'll like it. I just felt Eleanor to be insufferable and the tone of this book to kind of be insufferable as well. The next book that I finished in April was End Yet by Kate Baer. This is a collection of poetry that was written in 2022. So it does have a lot to do with the pandemic and her processing the pandemic. Kate Baer and her family, her husband and her children, have moved into the country seemingly at this time. So there's a lot of themes of being displaced, both by the pandemic, both by moving, both by feeling isolated from your husband and family, feeling disconnected from those people, dealing with perimenopause and relationships. And I thought it was okay. To me, it felt like the late 30s Ruby Core. Very obvious poems, short, kind of to the point, not a lot of subterfuge, not a lot of illusion or allusion, just very like kind of straightforward, talking about what was happening in that moment. There's a couple that have interesting verse or play with style. Didn't mind the themes of motherhood that much. I found some of the observations on marriage interesting. Overall, I was like, it was okay. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. I will be keeping this collection to revisit at some point, and I would definitely read more by Kate Baer. If you're interested in poetry and you liked Ruby Core when you were young, or you've read her before, maybe try this one as like the next step. I did think a lot of the themes of the pandemic and processing the pandemic were really interesting. I really like books that process the pandemic. So if you have any other suggestions for poetry or any other books with that kind of processing in it, definitely let me know in the comments below. The next book that I finished in April was Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. This is a standalone literary thriller, sort of, who is definitely more known for her fantasy, both standalone and series. This is the first R.F. Kuang that I've read, and this follows our main character, June, who is a kind of failed writer. She really hasn't made it big in her career, but she's best friends with a woman who has made it big in her career, and part of June's kind of whole persona about being friends with this woman is that she doesn't really like her, so she's constantly talking behind her back in her mind, formulating plans of like why her best friend is so obnoxious. But she goes with her best friend to celebrate her best friend's, I don't know, something milestone. Maybe they're making a television show of her book or something, and while she's with her best friend dies. But not before she shows June her new manuscript that no one else has seen. As June calls the ambulance and the police to try and help her friend, she also steals this manuscript. At first, she starts working on this manuscript to honor her friend, but very quickly June just passes the manuscript off on her own and submits it to her own publisher, and of course people really, really like it. The majority of this book is June's back and forth about like what she did and how she's justifying it, and there's a little bit of a thrilling mystery element because does someone know that she stole this? Was someone witness to this theft? And what is June going to do about it? A lot of people really like this book, and a lot of people talked about how it was such an interesting takedown of the publishing industry because June is white and the author of the manuscript that she stole is Asian. So there's this whole aspect of this story that has to do not only with theft of manuscript, but with portraying yourself as a person of color, with the inequalities that people of color face within the publishing industry and everywhere, obviously, with the racism that happens. June has this like reverse racism kind of take on things in a lot of times, or she struggles with that feeling, or she struggles with her racist tendencies and with her own racism. So like that's a big part of the book, and I think that's why people liked it. But like I've read other books where that was done better, and June is such a completely unlikable character with no redeeming qualities and no redemption by the end of this story that it was just really tedious and grinding to read. I really did not like this book. The more that I think about it, not only did I not like it, but it was like mostly forgettable. I don't really see the hype with this one, and maybe I'm one of the people that this book is calling out. Maybe I'm one of the people that R.F. Kuang is like writing down to, which a lot of people accused her of when this book came out, because I don't get it. But overall, like as far as just my enjoyment goes, not so much. So I would say skip this one if you haven't read it or if you're on the fence. Obviously, if you do want to read it, feel free to read it. The next book that I finished in April was The Crossed Out Notebook by Nicholas Giacombone. This was translated from the Spanish by Megan McDowell. This is another book that I didn't like this month. This follows Pablo, who is a screenwriter, and he's dabbled in other writing as well, but currently he is locked in the basement of a director who has kidnapped him to write screenplays for him. And we see Pablo writing these screenplays. We see everything from his perspective. We see how he got to this situation, and that he is like a very passive character. So even though he's been kidnapped, he hasn't really like tried to escape or anything, and he hasn't really done anything except talk to this director and try to write these screenplays and masturbate and not get along with his caretaker, who is the director's housekeeper maid. It's got a lot of potty humor, it's got a lot of repetition, it's got a very like male feel because of some of the sexual content, and it definitely felt like autofiction in that a lot of the ideas of Hollywood and of screenwriting and the put upon feeling of our main character about like how meaningless things is and how badly he's treated as a screenwriter even before he's kidnapped seem to be the feelings and sentiment of the author as well. Nicholas Giacombone is an Argentinian writer, and I guess he won a Golden Globe for writing Birdman, so it just felt very like a satire or like a satirical look at the screenplay industry, but also like a masturbatory, self-indulgent inner monologue of not only the main character but the author as well. And again, this is like not a likable main character, not super interesting. I really didn't like this one. I kind of wish I DNF'd this one, but I did read this one on audio. It was only a 6-hour audio. I read it on 2 times speed. It felt like I was reading it for like a week, but it really only took me like 3 hours. The next book that I finished in April was Mrs. Meeker's Money by Doris Miles Disney. Finally a book that I liked again in April. There were some books that I liked in April. There were some books that I didn't like. This is one of the Postal Inspector Madden series where we follow Postal Inspector Madden, who is a inspector for the USPS, and he gets all sorts of different cases. I also read Blackmail by this author, which was also in this series, where Inspector Madden has to investigate some poison pen letters and some blackmail letters. In this one, he is asked to investigate a fraud through the mail by Mrs. Meeker, and as he starts to investigate this mail fraud, seemingly defrauding this woman from like $30,000 through the mail, Mrs. Meeker turns up dead. So now he has even more incentive to solve this case. I really like these books. I really like this series. This is definitely my kind of cozy mystery series, and this isn't Golden Age because these were written in like the 60s through the 80s. This one was published in 1961, but they have that feel that I love, like Dorothy Simpson, like Dorothy Gilman, like Agatha Christie. I really love mysteries like this. The first one that I read was more of a suspense because you knew who perpetrated the crime, but this one was definitely more of a mystery, and they have some very thrilling moments, and Inspector Madden has to do some thrilling activity, which is really fun. I love Inspector Madden's character. Very typical investigator whose family has passed away, and he's having a hard time like dealing with that. But in this one, he also has like a lady friend, which we don't even get to know her name, but we know that he's going to hang out with her, which is pretty cute. In the 2 books that I've read so far, there's also a like side character that help him. In this one, he is training someone from DC who is training to be a postal inspector, and they kind of fall in love / fall in lust with someone involved in the case. In Blackmail, there was like a post office manager who fell in love with someone from the case. So very cute, like little love stories woven in there, just what you need, but not Inspector Madden, which I think is interesting. What's sad about these books is they're not even called a series on Goodreads. So I did buy a lot of 12 books off of eBay from Doris Miles Disney. I think she's mostly a forgotten mystery writer from the US. I don't know which ones are Inspector Madden, which ones aren't. I'll definitely read a bunch of her other books as well, but I would love to continue on with the Inspector Madden series. Super fun series. I'm loving it. The next book that I finished in April was The Wild Party, which is a long-lost classic by Joseph Moncur March, and this has drawings by Art Spiegelman. So this counts as my graphic novel for the month. In 2026, I'm trying to read one NYRB book every month at least, and at least one graphic novel. This is a epic poem or a long poem with illustrations. Some of the illustrations are a little naughty, so let me find one that are safe for the internet. There's some nudity in here, there's some queer characters in here, and this whole poem follows our main character Queenie, who is working in vaudeville, and she's currently dating kind of a mean guy from vaudeville as well. They have a very tumultuous relationship in the beginning of this poem / book. They get into a big fight, but then they decide to throw a wild party, and the majority of this is about that wild party and about what goes on there. I did not like this either. I thought the illustrations were interesting. I think the concept of a graphic epic poem is really interesting. I don't love Art Spiegelman's art style, but he is a classic creator. He wrote and drew Mouse, which is, you know, absolutely a must-read graphic novel if you're into graphic novels, but I didn't like the poem. I thought the poem was interesting. I thought the idea was interesting. All these like nefarious and unlikable characters, the queer aspects, the revenge aspects, the thrilling moments, but like the way the rhyming scheme worked and the way the verse was, I just really didn't enjoy. And you know what's funny is my friend went to see a play based on this and he said the play sucked. So I just think this is a long lost classic that maybe should have stayed lost. The next book that I finished in April was Her Majesty's Royal Coven by Juno Dawson. I read this partly because it was Trans Girl April, and this has a trans author, and one of the main characters is trans as well. This follows Neve and Helena and a bunch of other girls who knew each other when they were young. They were friends, and their parents or people that they knew were all part of Her Majesty's Royal Coven, because in this universe, in this reality, witches are real. So witches and warlocks have covens and cabals, and they live alongside of humans, or I think they call them mundanes, work with the human governments, the mundane governments, work with the non-magical governments, try to protect from demons and evil forces and things like that. But some of them just want to like live their lives. A few years ago, there was a big witch war where one warlock kind of took over a cabal, which is what a coven is called for male witches in this book, decided that the mundanes were inferior and that they should destroy them and that witches and warlocks should rule the world. And of course, Her Majesty's Royal Coven had to kind of come up against them, and the main characters in this book, like Helena and Neve, had to fight. And both Helena and Neve and many other witches involved in this story and involved in the world suffered incredible losses. We mostly follow Helena and Neve. Helena is now the head of Her Majesty's Royal Coven, and Neve has stepped away from the coven entirely, and she's trying to live her life, get back to living a life after her husband was killed in this great war. And their friend group is still around, and they still like see each other, but they've all kind of drifted apart and are like living their own lives. But we see that Helena and the coven hear of a prophecy that's going to come to pass, and Helena thinks that she's identified the center of this prophecy, the sullied child, and she asks Neve, who is a very powerful witch, to help her. And that's like the whole beginning part of this book, and it goes on to talk about their relationship and how they grew up as children and what's going on in the world now, today, what this prophecy might mean for the coven and for mankind at large. And then, like I said, this has a lot of queer themes, a lot of queer characters, a lot of trans characters, and it has a lot to do with the idea that male and female witches are separated as they grow up, and and some go to a coven, some go to a cabal, and so like what would you do if you were trans? It also talks a lot about white supremacy and white privilege, and about the idea that the majority of the covens more white focused. So there's also a character in here who started their own coven for people of color. So really interesting themes, definitely. Very, very, very topical, obviously. It was published in 2022. So even more topical now, 4 years later, with the idea of equality for queer folks, for trans folks, the idea of equality for people of color, the idea of segregation and white supremacy, and the idea of how and why some people don't recognize their white privilege and how they take that out into the world with them. I do think that this book could have been cut down by like 50 pages. This is another long one that I read this month, coming in at 423, so in between my other two long books. And I do think that this was a little like on the nose, like pretty obvious, like a lot of stuff that like didn't really go into depth about these conversations as much as I would have liked, but kind of hammered you over the head with the two political parties, if you will, idea of these themes and these events. But overall, I really enjoyed it, and I don't usually read a lot of series like this. Like, I read a lot of series where there might be an overarching story, but the majority of the mystery and the majority of the series is like self-contained in each book. So each book has like an overarching story that goes on, but like mostly like it just ends. But this book is more like a fantasy series that like continues on, and the end of this book was quite a cliffhanger. So be aware of that if you want to read it as a standalone. I think you can, but there's a cliffhanger for sure. I really enjoyed this, and I will definitely read more from this author. I started reading this book physically, which I enjoyed, and then I switched over to the audio because I needed to go somewhere, and I really like the audio, so I will definitely continue this series on audio as well. The next book that I finished in April was Everyone This Christmas Has a Secret by Benjamin Stevenson. This is the novella sequel to Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone. There's also Everyone on This Train is a Suspect, which is number 2 in the series, and this is number 3, which is the holiday novella. And the whole thing about these books are they are very direct to reader, as I mentioned earlier, and we follow Ernest Cunningham, who wrote about mystery writers, then in the first book got tangled up in a mystery himself. In the second book, we see that he's written a book about that initial mystery, and in this, the third book, he's writing his holiday special. So one of the things about how Ernest Cunningham writes is adhering to the rules of mysteries and adhering to fair play mysteries. So in this one, he's adhering to fair play mysteries, but also to Christmas specials. This one was fun, silly, and direct to reader. They all have some like lists and mixed media portions, and this one is all set up like an advent calendar, which I thought was really cute. And there are like holiday tags. I enjoyed it, and I'm glad that I read this after I read Every Time I Go on Vacation Someone Dies, because I was like, do I really even like this series? But I do. I do like this series, and I will continue on. You can read these as standalones, but I suggest reading them in order and start with Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone. The next book that I finished in April was The Glory of Their Times, the story of the early days of baseball told by the men who played it by Lawrence S. Ritter. This is a nonfiction book, all interviews with ball players who were playing in the major leagues from like the late 1800s to the early 1900s through like the 1940s and 50s. This was written in the 60s. Lawrence Ritter went around and interviewed all these old-time baseball players, and they talk about their time playing, and they talk about other players, and they talk about their thoughts on baseball and how it looked in the 1960s compared to when they were playing it in the early 1900s. So this was really fascinating, really interesting. The book has a lot of great pictures, photos of the time, and a lot of information about baseball straight from the people who played it. So it was a really fascinating read. I do think you need to like baseball to read this because it is a little bit repetitive because a lot of people talk about the same events or talk about their feelings in the same way. But if you like baseball, this is definitely a must-read book. This is another book that I started reading physically and then switched to the audio, and I'm glad that I did because while the physical book is all interviews, it's written in a way that takes the interview part out of it, so it's just like each man's story in his own words. But on the audio, which I got free through Hoopla, you hear Ritter talking to these men and you hear the actual conversation they had, which was really, really interesting. I don't know if the physical book and the audiobook completely match up, but this is one that I would definitely dip in and out of. I'll be keeping and I'll be going back to when I hear more about the baseballers in this book or when I want to revisit some of the events that they talk about or hear more about their experiences. The last book that I read in April was a short story that I get free with one of my subscriptions. It was For a Limited Time Only by Peng Shepherd. This is a time travel story about a man. One of his close friends offers him a job for a company that doesn't exist yet. So he does take this job, and it turns out that this company exists in the future, and they travel back to the past to slightly modify the past. You can't change big things in the past, but you can slightly modify mostly commercial aspects of the past, like mostly consumerist aspects of the past. Our main character wants to transfer to the futures department where he can go into the future and see things because he thinks that that's going to have more of an impact, or he's going to be able to have more of an impact on the future. And throughout this book, we see why he doesn't get the transfer, we see why he wants to transfer, and it's a very short story, so I think that's all you need to know about it. I like this one. This is the first Peng Shepherd that I read, and I love these short stories because you get to taste test authors, and that's exactly what I was hoping to do with this, and I will definitely be reading more Peng Shepherd. I think their other books also have to do with time travel and time loops and things like that, so I guess this kind of soft sci-fi is Peng Shepherd's normal form of writing, which I think is really interesting. This short story was pretty sad, and I liked the way that it came together just by the nature of it being a time travel story. You know, the story is kind of going back and forth and then like gels at a certain point, and I really enjoyed that. I thought some of it was kind of obvious, but like not in a bad way. So those are the 14 books that I read in April. Like I said, if you want to hear more of my more immediate thoughts on these books, go check out my weekly updates. I will leave those listed in the description box below. Let me know if you've read any of the books that I mentioned here. Let me know what you thought of them. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!